Hello, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to get started. So Nancy Vincent, the Senior Deputy City Clerk, is online, and she's going to serve as the chair of the Election Commission, and I'm going to help facilitate it here. I don't know if you all know me. My name is Rob Kolstad. I work in the city manager's office. Kristen reports to me, and so generally I stay out of Kristen's business. But as you know, she had a tragedy in her family, so we've all been trying to kind of step in and keep this process moving along. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy. We're going to do kind of the business part of the meeting, and then we're going to roll into basically the presentation, which will be mostly.
Okay. I'd like to call the Election Commission meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. The second item on the agenda is the roll call of commission members. Terry Kish.
Here.
Commissioner Muti.
Here.
Commissioner Mulatu.
Miss? Did she minister?
Is she not here yet?
She said commissioner.
Oh, I thought she minister. I'm here.
Okay. Commissioner Weber.
I'm here.
Commissioner Workman.
Wait, no, that's me.
Yeah.
Did I rep? There's only.
And a quorum is present.
Yep.
Oh,
We'll
okay.
go on to the next item of business, which is audience participation. No emails have been received regarding the additional redistricting alternatives. I've been checking the emails and we have not received any even yet. Rob, is there anybody in the audience who wishes to speak?
There are two folks in the audience. Would either of you like to address the Election Commission?
No, we just like to observe. Thank
Okay.
you.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Hearing that, we will move on.
Nancy?
Yes, sir.
We have two, it seems like we have two attendees on the Zoom, so I think we should probably ask them if they want to address the commission.
Okay. If you would like to address the commission this evening, would you raise your hand, please? You can either do that by pressing the raise hand button, or if you're on a phone, a landline, you can press *9.
It appears that they do not want to address the Election Commission.
Okay. Now we will move on to item 4, action items. The first item under that is 4A, is the approval of the August 10th meeting. If everyone on the commission has had an opportunity to review those minutes, I would entertain a motion for the approval.
So moved.
Kish?
Okay, and second,
Second.
Workman?
thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Moving on to the next item now, it's 4B, it's discussion of additional redistricting alternatives. And at this time, I would like to turn it over, the presentation, to the Deputy City Manager, Rob Kolstad.
Thank you, Nancy. Oops, did I get that right? Okay. So like I said, I'm just going to provide some quick introductory comments and then hand it over to City Development staff. The reason why we're here tonight, all of you were at the City Council meeting, and we received direction from City Council to take a look at some additional alternatives. Staff has done that. We've got, I think, 8, one of which doesn't meet the population requirements, but we want to show that anyway. So we're going to walk you through those 8 recommendations, kind of talk about them, get some discussion and reaction from the Election Commission. And then ideally out of this meeting, we'd like to get some direction from the Election Commission. And it seems to me you've got a variety of choices, but one of which is to say, yeah, we still like 7. Still think 7's the best. We looked at these alternatives and we still think 7's the best. A second alternative would be, you think one of these additional alternatives that we've developed is better and you'd like to recommend that one. You could maybe recommend a couple of options, although that gets kind of challenging because it becomes difficult to you know how hard it is to pick through all of these alternatives and then to push that over to council. Or you can ask us to do some additional research. So what we heard from council or as staff, and obviously if you heard different things, please share them as we go through the presentation. We heard two things in the meeting, and then there was one additional follow-up. The first thing in the meeting we heard was the finger of Ward 4 that dips kind of down below 120th. Is there a way that Ward 2 can absorb that? That's one thing we heard. The second thing we heard is there a way to more evenly distribute the population in these scenarios? And you guys know how hard that is when trying to hold precincts together, but that's the other thing we heard. And then the third thing that came in afterwards from Councilmember Henson was an idea to, before I get to that one. So these alternatives kind of reflect those two directions. So trying to figure out that sliver that dips down below 120th. And then trying to make as best we can an even population, holding, not splitting up a bunch of precincts. And then the third request that came from Councilmember Henson afterwards was there's a little sliver of what is considered original Thornton that is in Ward 2. All the rest of what is deemed original Thornton is in Ward 1, and there's a little sliver to the east of the community center, if you can picture that in your mind's eye, just north of Eppinger. We can talk about that later if you want. That was the other request from Councilmember Henson is, can you take a look at including that portion of original Thornton in Ward 1? The alternatives that you're going to see tonight don't do that. And we can talk about that. The commission can talk about that. Part of the reason why we didn't do that is because of just the complexity of dealing with these additional alternatives. But the other piece was it was in almost all likelihood going to involve another split precinct, which we were really reticent to do. So that's kind of an overview of why we're here. I have your packets printed. I'm going to go grab them, but I'm going to turn over the rest of the presentation to Thomas. How do you say your last name? DiPerino?
D'Imperio.
D'Imperio. Almost got it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rob. So as Rob said, we're here to consider some additional alternatives, but just as a refresher, I'm sure all of the commissioners are still very familiar with these considerations, but there might be people tuning in for the first time that haven't heard these before. So the considerations that we must consider when embarking on the redistricting process are as follows. The first and foremost is the population equity requirement. This is actually why we're redistricting in the first place. So the ward populations must be relatively equitable with the other ward populations. And this usually means that the largest ward cannot be more than 10% of the average ward population higher than the least populous ward. And population growth in the city is such that the largest ward now exceeds the 10% requirement, and we are required to redistrict. Secondly, we cannot draw the ward boundaries in such a way that any minority voting groups are diluted. We cannot draw the ward boundaries in such a way that a council member now finds themselves in a different ward than the one that they were elected to represent. The next one is more of a guideline than a hard rule, but to the maximum extent possible, we should follow the county precinct boundaries. Although, as we've seen in previous alternatives and the new ones presented tonight, precincts can and are split in these alternatives. The ward boundaries must be compact and the wards must be contiguous. And we must, to the greatest extent possible, preserve communities of interest. And as has been discussed previously, two communities of interest were identified during this redistricting process. The first is the significant Hispanic Latino community, largely concentrated in the southern part of the city, and the other community of interest related to socioeconomic status. Given the fact that both of these communities share a very similar geographic distribution, we feel that the communities of interest identified are well preserved with the alternatives that we've presented, especially when considering the minority vote populations. And so this is a slide format that is very familiar to commissioners, but I'll give a little bit of background. All of the alternative slides that we'll see tonight will follow the same format, with the map on the left side showing the ward boundaries as they exist currently, which due to population growth in the city, we do need to change. And the map on the right-hand side of the slide will show the proposed ward boundaries of the alternative that we are discussing. And so we included the alternative 7 that the commission has previously recommended to council. Of course, as Rob mentioned, We have additional direction from council, but we did use alternative 7 as kind of the baseline for the alternatives you are going to see. And we wanted to include it because it is still a viable alternative. Of course, it was the one that was recommended to council previously. And just a reminder, each alternative will be accompanied by a slide just like this, showing the population deviation percentages. And so the way to read this chart is to look for either the largest positive or smallest negative number, and that absolute value is the deviation between those wards. So I've also included the maximum deviation. So at a quick glance, you can see what it is, but of course this shows the relationship between each ward to each other ward relative to the average ward population and how much that ward is either above or below relative to the other wards. So alternative 7 did achieve a maximum deviation of 5.84%, which is tied for the lowest of all previously considered alternatives that we were able to come up with, and is well below the 10% maximum allowed. So the first of the new alternatives is titled alternative 7-1 or 7-1. This maintains the same configuration of ward boundaries south of 104th Avenue as alternative 7, but moves precinct 93 in its entirety into Ward 2 from Ward 4. Precinct 93 is located south of 120th Avenue and north of 112th Avenue, right on the western boundary with North Glen. This was included for demonstration purposes. This alternative does not meet the population equity requirements and is therefore not a viable alternative. However, we did want to include it just to demonstrate that this is not a viable alternative. So the population breakdown shows that there's 2 instances where the wards are exceed the percent deviation between the smallest ward and the largest and second largest ward. So the maximum deviation is 11.80%, which again is larger than the 10% maximum allowed. So next we will see alternative 7-1A, which like 7-1 moves precinct 93 in its entirety into Ward 2 from Ward 4, but splits precinct 109 along Race Street running north and south, and Thornton Parkway running east and west, with the eastern portion moving into Ward 2 and the western portion and southern portion remaining in Ward 1. This is to help meet the population equity requirement that is complicated by moving precinct 93 into Ward 2. And this does split one county precinct, precinct 109, and it also splits the Rancho Viejo subdivision. The population deviation is 9.44%. So while it's much higher than previously recommended alternative 7, it is below the 10% maximum. I'm not sure if we want to pause after each alternative for questions or go through. There are 8, so I guess there's 7 viable alternatives. So I'm not sure how the commission wants to handle questions. We want to save them to the end or stop after each one.
Just go through all of them. What do you guys think?
I'd go through all of
Sounds
them.
Okay, perfect. So I'll move on to alternative 7-2, which maintains the same configuration of ward boundaries south of 104th as alternative 7, with precinct 109 proposed to be split along Thornton Parkway and the northern portion moving into Ward 2. And this splits precinct 93 along York Street, which runs somewhat diagonally. And this splits the Walton Heath subdivision and would see the Hawthorne Hills Apartments, which is that far northwest sliver, remaining in Ward 4, and the rest of the precinct moving into Ward 2. This configuration reunites the western portion of the Wood Glen subdivision within Ward 2 and results in 2 split precincts, 93 and 109.
Can I just make a real quick comment?
Yes.
Because I was concerned about that. And so that little finger that comes down here.
Mhm.
So I actually drove by it and looked on Google Maps. right here. This is a very high density area. It's filled with apartments and some commercial properties. But there's many, many apartments. And it's kind of bordered its own little area because on the, let me see, on the west side, we have the RTD tracks. On the east side, we have, is it York
Yes.
Street? And then, we have 120th and then it kind of splits down. So it's kind of a, it's kind of its own little thing. And this is the reason I'm mentioning this now is because this is in many of the different scenarios. Because I have a big concern with splitting precincts and splitting communities, but this seems to be their own little ones. They don't have a whole lot common. There's a park over here with this as far as geographical or common things together. So I just wanted to mention that only because it's mentioned in many of the other ones.
Yeah. And that is something that we considered when going through the various alternatives and the viability of doing so, because we wanted to split communities as, we wanted to avoid that as much as
Yes,
possible.
yes.
But of course, with the direction from council, we did want to look at some alternatives that we may not have considered previously. And so for the population breakdown, this does achieve a deviation of 8.30%, which is below the 10% maximum. Next is 7-2A, which like 7-2 splits precinct 93 along York Street, which does split the Walton Heath subdivision and the Hawthorne Hills apartments and the surrounding area remaining in Ward 4, and the rest of the precinct moving into Ward 2. And this has the same split of precinct 109 in South Thornton along Race Street to the north and south, and Thornton Parkway east and west, with the eastern portion moving into Ward 2 and the western and southern portions remaining in Ward 1. And this would result in the Rancho Viejo subdivision being split, as well as precinct 93 and 109 being split. The population deviation of 7-2A is 6.15%.
So, sorry, can I add something? So if you had and I apologize for the nomenclature, the 7-1-A, that was probably my fault. But one of the things we wanted to be clear about is that like 7-1 is a derivation of 7. And then 7-1A is a refinement of 7-1, trying to get the population a little bit more equaled out. So same thing with 7-2. 7-2 was like, okay, let's try this. And then we saw what this was. And then we say, okay, is there some tweaking we can do to get the population a little bit closer? So you'll see that kind of throughout the 7-3, 3A, and 7-4, 4A.
Yes. So 7-3, we'll see the same configuration of ward boundaries south of 104th as alternative 7, with precinct 109 proposed to be split at Thornton Parkway. And this splits precinct 93, this time along Clayton Street, which would split the Walton Heath and Brookshire subdivisions, with the areas east of Clayton moving into Ward 2, and the rest of the precinct remaining in Ward 4. And this results in 2 split precincts, 93 and 109, and achieves a population deviation of 5.08%. Alternative 7-3A has the same configuration of ward boundaries as 7-3, with the exception of precinct 72, which is way up in the north. So you can see there's a portion of precinct 72 that contains the Morrison subdivision that is proposed to move into Ward 3 from Ward 4. And this is notable. It is a portion west of Colorado Boulevard that would move into and be part of Ward 3. This also maintains the split of precinct 93 along Clayton Street, which splits the Walton Heath and Brookshire subdivisions, and still proposes to split precinct 109 in the south along Thornton Parkway. And 3 precincts are split: 93, 109, and the northern precinct 72, which does contain a lot of unincorporated land So it's a rather large precinct, and so it is split, but we've maintained the entirety of Morrison subdivision within the same ward. In this case, it would move to Ward 3. 7.3A achieves a maximum deviation of just 3.60%, which was the lowest population deviation we were able to achieve amongst any of the alternatives. 7-4 splits precinct 93 along York Street, like we've seen in previous alternatives, which splits the Walton Heath subdivision, and with the portion containing the Hawthorne Hills apartments remaining in Ward 4, and the rest of the precinct moving into Ward 2. In this alternative, precinct 109 down south is not split and would remain in Ward 1, whereas in previous alternatives, all or some of that precinct was proposed to move into Ward 2. So this would keep it in Ward 1 and not split that precinct. So the only split precinct in 7-4 would be precinct 93, which is split along York Street. And the population deviation of 7-4 is 8.99%. And then the eighth and final new alternative that will be presented tonight is 7-4A, which has the same split of precinct 93 along York Street as we've seen previously, and precinct 109 split along Thornton Parkway, as was seen in alternative 7 and several other alternatives. The notable difference here is that precinct 137, which is currently in Ward 3 and has been proposed to move into Ward 2 in all of the previous alternatives that have been presented to the commission, would remain in Ward 3 with just the northern half of, I believe that's precinct 135, moving into Ward 2. So this would maintain precinct 137 entirely within Ward 3. However, it would split the Knott's Landing subdivision and would still result in 2 split precincts, 93 and 109. And the population deviation of 7-4A is 6.25%. So we do have a slide, might be hard to read, but it has the population deviation charts for each of the 8 new alternatives for a side-by-side comparison. But of course, I'm happy to flip back through any of the slides as we go through questions. And so next steps would be to for the commission to select one or potentially more than one alternative to take forward to council for their consideration at the planning session to be held on November 1st, 2022. And so that concludes my portion of the presentation, but of course, I'm available for any questions that the commission may have. Thank you.
I guess I can start here.
Yeah.
So I've gone through and I've looked at each one. And in the past, we have always tried not to split neighborhoods. Sometimes you just can't get around it. But we try to not split neighborhoods or subdivisions. And even though you may have one subdivision here, another one right here, they're just across the street, you know, and they have the same people, you know, go to the same schools and same boundaries. And so it's a community. And so I've always been sensitive, and this council's always been sensitive with that. The second thing we've always been sensitive about is whenever possible, try to keep that lower deviation. But sometimes if you had to, you know, choose one over the other, we've always chose trying to keep the neighborhoods together. You can have neighbors who talk about issues out there, and which we want to foster. We want to foster engagement with our citizens, our community. So in looking at that, the only 2 that did not split, I thought, communities was 7-2 and 7-4. And so I would like, especially look at those, but you know, I'd like to hear from the other commissioners also. I thought I'd kick it off and see what everyone else thinks.
My 7-2 is out because of Ward 2, it's just a population.
Ooh, 7-2 is out.
Pretty neat.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's because they're pretty high deviation in
Yeah.
population,
Yeah,
not one, but
yes,
two of those.
Yes, but is below the 10% that's
Right.
allowed. It is below that.
and that, the biggest thing I felt like I kept hearing last time meeting was like, the population is not close to it, to each other. So
And that will,
that is why I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm just removing 7.
and that may change next year too, you know,
Yeah.
as more people move in now. It's a, what's the word I want to use? In process thing. And even though we can't consider that, you know, it may change in a couple months. For example, that little finger subdivision, was that 93 that I talked about? That's a real high density area. That must be troublesome for you, Thomas, to try to figure out, you know, and because there's thousands of people in that small little space. And so it must be a challenge for the staff. And so, and the other one I was looking at is 7-4 that did not split any communities. And 7-4 was below the 10%, but it's also 8.99, you know, as far as deviation. All the other ones split neighborhoods, split subdivisions, and communities of interest. I don't feel comfortable with that, but anyway. Good point.
My favorite's gonna be 7-3 and 7-3 because of the less deviation. I feel like it's much closer on population. And that was the biggest thing I heard. I think we can get closer with those. And I keep hearing, I mean, we're gonna end up splitting regardless for the most part at the precinct. So I'm not sure if we can get away with it as much.
As far as I'm concerned, I still like our first alternative, to be quite frank. If I'm going to look at some of these others, I think 7-2A and 7-3A are two of the ones I favor over the others, but in my opinion, I kind of hesitate on both of them. I don't like the idea of splitting neighborhoods. I think for me, that's a big thing. And with 93, I know we heard a lot about 93 from Mr. Matkowski here this last meeting, but with almost all these alternatives here today, with the exception, I think, of the first two, they all entail splitting 93 in a different way. And if the people in the neighborhood really are upset about being split, why would we just do it in a different way? It doesn't seem to make much sense to me. If I don't want to split the neighborhoods, I feel like that particular precinct is already split. It has been in the past. Leaving it be is kind of what I favor. But I also like the low deviation. What was it? Was 7-3A? Is that the one? Yeah, 7-3A was the lowest deviation. I like that as well. So I think, it's my opinion. You know, the original alternative we had, 7-3A is pretty good, but I still like 7 personally.
Can we go back to 7?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So why are we entertaining it even, or we already agreed on it the first time?
Well, yeah, council asked us to look at some alternatives, and so that's what we're doing. And so I like I said in the beginning, I think we felt obligated to bring some alternatives to the election commission for consideration. And I think you can look at these and say, hey, these actually are an improvement, or you can say, yeah, these work, but we still like 7.0, 7 the original. And so that I think is up to the commission as to what you want to recommend to council, and and then they, you guys make the recommendation, and then they make the, they ultimately make the decision about how the words are going to get redrawn. So
Then I'm gonna go second with them. I still will keep the alternative
like
7.
7. Okay.
And my backup would be my 7-3A.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm noticing the trend, and when I looked at this earlier, 7-3A jumped out at me as similar to what they were asking for. Council was asking for what's the closest you can get, and it sounded serious enough that if we could get it down to 0, then they didn't care what it looked like. That's what we should do. And so this is the closest to that. And it actually doesn't look as bad as you would think for getting such a close number. But, you know, the original 7 is really close. It's almost as close in percentage numbers. And that was what we originally thought was the best out of 7 different options. So I'm kind of split. I could go with 7.3A if the commission wants to just, you know, take that to heart in that way and just say, what's the lowest number we can come up with, and let's just hack until we get the lowest number. If that's the feeling of the commission, then I would say 7.3A. If just giving the best overall based on the previous several months of considerations, then I would say alternative 7 is still better than the others for the reasons we've laid out over the months.
With regard to precincts, 7 that you originally proposed only had 1 split precinct, 109, and 7.3A has 3 split precincts because there is a split precinct up at 72 where it crosses Colorado. 72 would be split, and then also 93 and 109 are split, but that's an election administration issue, more or less.
And to your point, Commissioner Workman, this one gets us pretty low with, but we got there by, as Erica said, splitting precincts. And I'd venture to guess, although we'd pull our hair out, we could probably get it lower, but it resulted in more split precincts. And so we did want to be respectful of that key consideration in this process. 7, you said 7 had 1.
Only 109.
And I think this had 3, which was, I think, and they were anywhere, of all these alternatives, I think we were anywhere between 1 and 3 split precincts in all of these alternatives.
So in a sense, it does demonstrate the fact that the smaller you want to get the deviation, the more splitting has to be done, right? And so those 2 alternatives, if they come from the commission as your 2 favored alternatives, I mean, it definitely shows the correlation there, so.
And also, isn't 72 is not incorporated though? It's not really affecting Doran?
Well, the entirety of the precinct spans boundaries, but the portion that is split off is incorporated. So the surrounding areas that are white on the map are the unincorporated areas. And so the hashed portion is the incorporated portion that is proposed to move into Ward 3, which is the entire Morrison subdivision.
But it's not a very dense subdivision, right? So it would have a smaller number of voters impacted than splitting in 93 where it's more densely populated. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, density is definitely very relative, but I think it offers a sizable population with which to work with when looking at different alternatives, and does allow us to have some portions of precinct 93 move into Ward 2 without making Ward 2 the largest by a significant margin, because that's been the issue that we've been having, is that precinct 93 is just too densely populated to move into Ward 2 in its entirety without really needing to shift population elsewhere, so that Ward 2 doesn't become too large relative to the other wards. And so that's why originally we proposed to just leave it alone, because it really didn't work without really splitting the precinct and splitting neighborhoods. I also want to mention that the options that split 93 along York Street with just that upper northwest corner remaining in Ward 4, that technically splits a subdivision, although York is a large enough street that it definitely feels like a distinct neighborhood with the apartments to the northwest and the rest of the neighborhood to the southeast. But technically it does split a subdivision. And then the configuration that's shown here where 93 is split along Clayton Street, that also splits the same subdivision, Walton Heath, and it splits the Brookshire subdivision as well.
So it's 3.
So, Yeah, so it's kind of splitting up neighborhoods too. So there's really, the challenge with precinct 93 was that there's no way to really split it up without also splitting up established subdivisions, which council seemed hesitant to do. And that's why they wanted us to look at moving 93 in its entirety over, which we've seen has proven to be quite difficult or even impossible without other concessions.
I do have, for comparison's sake, I printed out that list that Michael made. The population of 93, precinct 93 is 2,579. Comparatively, the population of 72, precinct 72 up north is 881. And then the other precinct that would be divided by both alternative 7 and alternative 7A is 109, and that population is 2,217. So I mean, when you're talking about a, 2,500 and 2,200 compared to 72, they're definitely different numbers, and that's why there's a lot of juggling to achieve.
Are we gonna have the populations of the precincts on the map that we give city council?
Yeah, we'll have that. We'll get that for you. Don't you worry.
You got that question out of me.
I think we got that Wednesday morning. Yeah, no problem.
So I would like to take us back just a little bit to provide a little bit of context. When we first started meeting, I was very enthusiastic and I was just drawn all over, and I didn't understand the population density differences, and I didn't have the technology and tools to do that. So I came up with a bunch of things. I'm like, well, what if we make them all horizontal? And what if we make them all this way? And it was, it was like, how can we make it look fair and what seems to make sense? And the more we've gone through this process, and Commissioner Kish tells us about how it was in the past, and talking to people and not wanting to split neighborhoods, and understanding the difficulties of splitting precincts and the collateral damage that can impact. And I started moving slowly but surely to, well, it doesn't look quite like a square, but it's fair in these other ways, or it's equitable in these other ways, or it's preferable. And so in that same sense of, looking at it superficially, it might seem better one way. I think in the same sense, getting that population deviation from 5.8 to 3.6 seems like one of those superficial changes, like, oh, look, it's a smaller number. But then when you dive into the details more and more, it seems like 5.8 is a pretty good number. Like, we could make it look a little better, but then we would be close to the 10, and we could make it be a little slimmer margins, but then that splits up a whole bunch of stuff, and then it looks bad in an unfair way, right? Not just not pretty. So as I'm looking at all these and considering that, I think Alternative 7 does a great job of doing all of that stuff. In fact, admittedly, that wasn't the one that I wanted out of all the others. But the more we've been discussing it and the more we understand, the more I'm looking at it and saying it does seem to be the best. And that's why, as a group, we decided on it.
I agree. I think 7 splits the difference is the best of all the alternatives we looked at. I still like it.
I agree. And we all came with number 7 separate, and we liked it.
Yeah, I can live with 7. Once again, driving through that, finding out that little sliver in what's that, 93, driving through that community, I said, oh yeah, I remember this. I had a friend who lived in that area. 7 does not split it as bad as some of the other ones.
It's also not changing how it's. split.
It's not changing, but once again, I have to respect city council and their concerns too. You know, there was several comments, especially about that particular area. And that was kind of sensitive to the councilors.
Well, to be fair, it was a concern for one of the council members.
Yes,
And we're looking to get what, 5 votes. So my bigger concern is majority consensus on council. And I think that we've taken his opinion into consideration. We've looked at the alternatives. But I keep coming back to 7. I think that it is better than the others that we've looked at here today.
Can we still have a backup? So we don't have to.
we
come
can
back?
recommend 1 or 2 or 3, right?
I think you guys can do whatever you want. But I think that one way, if you're leaning towards recommending 7, saying we looked at these alternatives, but we're still recommending 7. If you can, and you do have a preferred backup to these alternatives, or just even some thoughts about, okay, if we weren't going to do 7, here's what made the most sense to us. I think that would be helpful. So like, if precinct 93 was in question, you know, if the commission said, as a matter of hypothetical, you know, in looking at 93, if we did need to make a change, like we like that York Street split because it pulls these apartments up and keeps the other, you know, the other neighborhood whole, you could do that. You don't have to do that. You could just say, we'd like 7, but we'd like, you know, if we had to choose a backup of these alternatives, we like 7, 3A, or whichever ones you guys reach consensus on. And we can talk about kind of the presentation a little bit later, once you guys have kind of landed on where you, because I think there's some things with the presentation that might help the discussion that we didn't do that we could do in the next round. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I think you can do whatever you want, but you definitely can have a backup.
So I think we already discussed that we're gonna have numbers on the next one. I do anticipate some on the spot finagling that's gonna be suggested. Well, what if we do this and what if we do that? And someone's probably gonna be back of the napkin math trying to figure it out. That's how I imagine the council meeting going, because that's kind of what would have happened last time if we had the numbers. So I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that. So I kind of want to prepare for that. And also, as we're going, like, I think it is good for us. You know, we can say, well, most of us liked alternative 7.3A as a backup, but we can also say, you know, if we're comfortable with it, you know, what it was about this one that drew us to it, because I don't know that we're all looking at it for the exact same reasons. And I think the same thing, Commissioner Kish could say, look, that, you know, these ones have a higher deviation, but they don't split neighborhoods. And I've been here, and he's probably been here longer than some of the council members. And so it's good to appreciate the wisdom and counsel for that. So I'm happy to do that instead of, you know, or in addition to the scripted way, because I think last time they got an understanding of, okay, here's all the steps they went through. At least they heard it. I don't know if they actually internalized it as well, but they heard it. They knew what we went through, so we don't have to go through all that again. We can really narrow down on, you know, okay, we heard that, let's get the numbers down as much as possible. Let's get the deviation down as much as possible. We heard you, we looked at it, and it starts splitting things all over the place. So then we got concerned a little bit. We looked at a few others. The deviation would go up a little bit, but then we would start reuniting communities a little bit. So if you're willing to go, you know, theoretically, council, if you're willing to go in the opposite direction a little bit more, we can, you know, put communities back together a little bit better. So I think that kind of a approach is how I would prefer to approach it. And then with the preparation of, all right, well, if they're going to start, you know, hammering us with questions, then we have the answers to get back to them.
No, I think that explaining why we like the alternatives we like, or what we've looked at as the different alternatives that we didn't like, I think is really important. I think you're right. Because I think there were some strong opinions last time about 93 or about the population deviation. We want to explain why we looked at some of these others and came to the conclusion we did. I am extremely hesitant about going into council meeting and saying, let's negotiate, let's wheel and deal, let's do this, because it almost is. I think that our job as a commission is to decide on alternatives and present those to council. Council's job is to vote. Their job is not to dictate to us what they want and we come back here and we do it. I think that we've taken their opinions into consideration. We have looked at alternatives, but those alternatives really don't, for me, meet, they don't meet the standards that we're trying to achieve as well as the alternative we already came up with. And that being the case, I think going in there and offering up a backup or let's talk about population, it just opens up a can of worms. There are extremely divergent opinions on council for any of you that haven't gone to see it lately. And I think that you're just walking into a bunch of landmines and waiting for two opposite sides to pull us in opposite directions, which for me, I think, we went in last time, I got a bit defensive when they kind of started going at our plan. I wasn't expecting that. And I don't want to put us in the same position again. I think that we come up with the alternative we like. Let's explain it thoroughly as to why we considered other options, they didn't work. And let's make our proposal, whatever that may be, and have them vote or not.
I was not happy when I left.
And was I. And I, as far as it's concerned, and they're welcome to have their opinions, but at the same time, our job is to make a proposal, to take those opinions into consideration, and they can take it or leave it. So.
Just aside, I have a question. For 3A, is there possible, I don't know how this thing works. For 93, is there make it a smaller split? Is there possible? I mean, I understand it need to be to keep some of it back and forth. Is it possible? So that way, I'm just thinking of what they would ask, right? Is there smallest chance to split it less? So it can go back to Ward 4, that 93, is it?
Well, we looked at it, and so other than the ones where just the northwestern portion is split, we really can't split it any other way without affecting even more subdivisions. And technically they might be separate individual small subdivisions, but I think what the council member Matkowski was saying is that it does feel like one cohesive neighborhood. And so we didn't want to be splitting even further. What also complicates things a little bit from a population equity perspective is that if you look, there's kind of like a little boot shape right at the bottom of that sliver. And that extreme southern portion of precinct 93, as well as a little bit portion of the northwestern boundary of the southernmost portion is currently vacant, and nobody lives there. So we could split that, but it wouldn't have any, so it would look better on the map, but it wouldn't have any effect on the population. And so any other splits would just be carving up more neighborhoods. But it is something that we looked at before generating these alternatives.
Yeah, I forgot about that 73
Mhm.
or 73A. It does include a lot of that undeveloped land.
Mhm.
I don't know how much I'm out late to the party, but I've been having fun since I'm here. That whole area, precinct 93, as well as 137 and 135, to me seemed really challenging even to split the precinct, because you look at those neighborhoods and there just aren't like a lot of logical places where you would say, yeah, that makes sense. Let's break it there. Like in 93, I think you're looking at the three alternatives. It's either this, it's this, or is this? And then everything else, when you start to look at the map or you're in the neighborhood, it's really, really tough to say, where would I split this? There are census blocks within there, but you got like people, next to each other's houses that would be different wards. So that was a big, and you kind of had the same phenomenon from my standpoint with 137 as well. It just was really, really challenging.
Of course, alternative 7.4 would minimize that, but it's also one of the, I think it's the highest as far as deviation at 8 point almost 9.
Yeah.
agree with the other commissioners that they did pick us for a reason, or appointed a commission, because they don't have time to spend hours and months diving into the details, having all the discussions, going back and forth, and fine tuning and considering like dozens of different things. And it is their prerogative to disband us and do whatever they want, probably. But at least we can say, you know, you picked us. What was it? Steve Jobs said, you don't hire smart people and then tell them what to do. You hire the smart people so they can tell you what to do. And I'm not commenting on our intelligence, I'm commenting on our expertise based on time spent on this particular problem.
So Commissioner, what I guess I hear you saying then is, and the other commissioners, is we like our original alternative 7. The question is, did we want to give council propose a second one? Just, no, I don't want to say appease them, but just an alternative.
It's not to appease them, but it's just to say we took it into consideration,
Yeah.
what you said, and this is what we came up with.
Yep.
I mean, I'm open to it if everybody wants, I'm not. opposed
To
to-
open to what, I'm sorry?
I'm not opposed to coming up with alternative, a backup, if that is what we want to do.
But
But
no
I'm
more than
going
one,
with
I
7,
think.
no.
I personally don't think we should do an alternative. I think we should just make one recommendation personally. Again, there's very divergent opinions on council. I think we're just opening the door to a very difficult meeting and then us back here in a month's time. So I think that we should make our decision, make our recommendation, explain it well, explain the other alternatives that we looked at and why we did or didn't like them, and move forward.
And I think an interesting thing is, this is a public meeting.
Mhm.
They could be listening now, or they could listen later. And they have all the information, they have all the details. If they want to override and supersede, they can say, well, you guys didn't recommend 738, but I see it on the meeting here. So that's what we're gonna go with.
No.
And they
They-
also could be at this meeting. It is an
Yeah.
open meeting. They're not here. So
Yeah,
that's kind of why I think we should just make a decision. I mean, if it's our job, make some sort of decision on what we want to suggest, recommend.
You want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we recommend alternative 7 again.
I'll second that happily.
That was Moody and Mulatu.
Moody and
Commissioner Mulatu.
all those in favor of recommending alternative 7 to city council? Say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passed unanimously.
Thanks, Nancy.
Good comments. Good stuff.
So item, sorry, this is awkward. We're tag teaming this and obviously I'm not part of the election commission, but item 5 is other matters. And one of the things I thought it might be good to talk about is the meeting on 11/1. Are you all able to and willing to attend the meeting? No, you're not.
I emailed that pretty much the same week. I'm
Okay.
not able to.
Okay.
Available.
Let me check. 11/1 is a Tuesday. I probably can, I don't see
I'm
any
okay.
conflicts immediately, so I should be able to.
I just have a question. If they don't accept it, are they gonna send us back again here?
They could. Right?
So technically, you're charged with making a recommendation to council by the end of the year. And you tried to do that. And they had questions about sort of direction for specific considerations. I think that you're well within your rights to say, we got some additional resources from staff. It didn't change our opinion on our proposed best alternative and our recommendation, so we're coming back to you with that. I think that you can say, this is our recommendation, and then you're done. I understand the concern with council wanting to pull numbers and start making a new map on the fly. I think, and Rob and I are both new to this party, and so when we first saw the maps, we got a little giddy and excited about it. to
And then we realized how hard it's really been
Yes.
for you. you
Yeah,
know?
I was like, this is kind of fun, but that wore off pretty quickly, okay? And so I have to say, like, precinct 93, the one that they specifically had pointed questions about, because when they go out and canvass for signatures or talk to residents, one side of the street is in one area and one is in another ward. But what we're dealing with there is a population of 2,579, but also 24 census blocks, right? And so we looked at and brought to you the 3 ways we could divvy up 93, and none of them are ideal, right? So I think we can present it better, but I don't know that you would have to reconvene and consider more than you already have. Like, your work is complete. You have completed it through the course of the year. And if you have your recommendation, they are the ones who adopt an ordinance and change it. But I don't know that they can reject your recommendation.
Yeah, I don't know either. Again, the last time we did this was like 10 years ago. But I do remember it was a little bit of a challenge, but I agree with Erica. You guys have a charge to make a recommendation. You did. They asked you to do some more work, which you've done, and you're making a recommendation. I hope that it's accepted. If it's not, they can say thank you, or they could ask you to continue doing some work. And I think that's up to you guys, whether if they ask whether you'd want to do that, you say, we've kind of made our recommendation. Because, they can also then, staff can develop new maps based on their direction as well. So it's kind of, I don't exactly know, to be honest with you.
Well, and so I guess the point I would make from a staff perspective is, you guys have been clear that 7 is still your preferred. You just voted unanimously that would be the recommendation again. Do you want the additional information that you considered here tonight to go to council with your recommendation and then speak to why it didn't change your mind?
What additional information are you referring to?
I mean, the additional maps and alternatives that you guys have looked at and considered here tonight.
I would not bring it.
What's that?
I would not want it to be sent to them and then go through it and then we have to explain that. That's
I
why we're
think, yeah,
recommending it. I mean,
you may
that's the
be
whole
right.
point.
I think simply speaking to it, talking about the alternatives we've looked at, why we did not like any of them as much as we liked the initial alternative 7 is probably sufficient.
I think we can tell them that there was 7 more alternatives that we looked at, but we felt that our recent proposal met all the criteria
Yeah.
that we're responsible for.
Imagine it's 4 of us. How we have different view about stuff in life. To be able to come after, how many did we see?
8
Total?
today and 7 the first time.
I mean, to
15.
come
15.
again the second time with the same agreement, it says a lot.
I think you're right.
So one thing we could do is include these additional alternatives as we have in the past in the packet. And so, you can still walk through why 7's good and why you didn't recommend, from a conceptual standpoint, why you didn't recommend the alternatives. And then they're still in the packet so they can see them and see the deviations for themselves, okay. But I want to see that finger in 93 into Ward 2, and then you can see the deviation. Okay. So Commissioner Milata, you will not be able to be there on 11/1.
Sorry.
You will not be able to be there on 11/1. Okay. Is the commission okay pressing forward with that meeting on 11/1?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
It
It needs to be done.
Doesn't want to
We
be
can
in
wait
December either.
And so then I think what we can do from a staff standpoint is put together again a presentation and some talking points. And like the commission has said, spent some more time diving right into 7, what we liked about it, and then talk a little bit about the alternatives and maybe what you didn't like about it. But please feel, those talking points are not sacrosanct, so please feel free to modify them or ad lib as you're comfortable. We're just trying to give you guys some tools to talk to them, not give you, literally a script to read out to
I
the
think one
council.
thing I would like, since I'm not gonna be there, is to be emphasized is that why we kept 7 for me at least is that, of course, the deviation. Second is that it's less splitting. I think I just want to make sure we emphasize on that one comparing the other ones we looked at.
And I think they've already heard majority of what we've told them the first time. Maybe just look at the summary of that last slide with just a summary, why we chose 7. I would like to focus more maybe on, or at least share with the council that we didn't lightly make this decision. We looked at each scenario and we looked at advantages, disadvantages, not to split neighborhoods, try to keep along precinct lines. And the best that we found that we thought after a lot of consideration was our original proposal, number 7. I would like to maybe, does that make sense?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think they're all saying the same thing. I think
Yeah.
emphasizing that we took their opinion into consideration. We looked at alternatives that all, tried to accommodate those opinions, but in the end, we still came to the same decision we did before. I think. it's
Yep.
good.
Planning department did a great job. Thank you again
Yes, thank you.
for giving us the information.
thanks.
It's hard. I know.
Are there any other matters that need to come before the election commission this evening?
Seeing a lot of head nods, no, Nancy.
All righty. So a motion to adjourn is in order.
Motion to end the meeting at 7:03.
7:03 p.m. Yes.
A second from Moody, was that or?
Either way.
Okay.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passed unanimously. We are adjourned at 7:03 p.m.